Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 3, The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what's going to happen within this episode. Sora, who became a Hollow, goes after his sister Inoue for forgetting him, but their connection saves him, allowing him to pass on, and Ichigo agrees to help Rukia with her Shinigami work. We'll now go into a more detailed summary, scene by scene, and give our opinions as we go. So we open with Ichigo and Rukia, who are still in his room after the attack, and Ichigo asks Rukia why Inoue's brother would attack him. Rukia then says, given the previous attacks, that potentially a powerful Hollow hiding in the shadows who controls other hollows is after his soul for his spiritual powers. When Ichigo resists the idea of killing Inoue's brother, after accepting that he is the actual target and potentially from a different hollow, Rukia says that if he doesn't kill him, then he'll wander forever. And then she has a realization stating that Inoue may also be in danger. Obviously, this is a little bit of an exposition scene and basically recapping or reminding us what it is that occurred in the previous episode. We then kind of rewind time and return to before they heard a noise where Inoue and Tatsuki were talking about food and gossiping, and then something rips a pink teddy bear which falls off of a shelf. When it falls, Inoue obviously goes over to it to look, with Tatsuki following behind her, and then they are able to once again hear those heavy thuds from outside. Obviously, again, a setup scene, but also brings to mind the old cliche of curiosity killed the cat. I don't know, if a teddy bear that's on your shelf in a very stable position suddenly gets a rip and falls off, that would be a sign for me to run, not go over and take a closer look. And then if I did hear thuds afterwards, which they seem to hear because they look in that direction, again, that would be a sign for me to run. But they're not going to do that. That would ruin the plot. So we next move back to Ichigo, who is now roof hopping, so jumping from roof to roof, in his Shinigami form, on his way to potentially save Inoue while giving Rukia a piggyback, who informs him that holes who linger without being protected and sent to Soul Society and become hollows often go after those that they loved most in life before they died. So now that Sora has failed to defeat Ichigo, it's most likely that he is going to go after his most loved one, which would have been Inoue. She then informs Ichigo that the bruise on Inoue's leg was most likely caused by a hollow, and now that they know the identity of the hollow, it was likely Sora going after his most loved one. Now, obviously, we have the fact that this is made for a younger audience, so they give out information piece by piece over time. Obviously, back when they were actually discussing, how hollows were created, and he noted Sora and he gave the whole backstory about how, he died at their clinic and so on and so forth. Why wouldn't she have told him then that, you know, hollows may go after their loved ones? Like, obviously, it looks like she had forgotten about it at first and then was reminded of it because there was that sudden realization at the end of the other episode. But then at the same time, she also spent some time looking at Inoue's bruise on her leg, which was clearly not natural or caused by the car, Why at that time did she not indicate the potential danger to Inoue? Obviously, at that time, she had already had some sort of encounter with a hollow. Maybe that would have been the time to say, hey, maybe we should, keep a watch on this person who's obviously been attacked by a hollow just now or had some sort of contact with a hollow. And I'm curious about her motivation for not mentioning it. Like the not mentioning that Sora may be the one attacking her due to their connection because they didn't know about Sora at the time. Fair. But they definitely knew that a hollow had grabbed her leg, or Rukia at least recognized that a hollow had grabbed her leg, and yet she didn't say anything. Was she planning to just wait and see if Inoue had happened to get attacked? Did she think it was a fluke? I'm curious what her motivation there was for not mentioning that Inoue may have been in danger or already targeted by a hollow at the time she was looking at the bruise on her leg. And my personal speculation on that is kind of I mentioned before that this is like as an anime, it is typically like it's still entertaining as an adult, don't get me wrong, but it is geared more towards a younger audience, so they tend to give out information in pieces. And so probably why she didn't mention anything at that time, A, for the plot, and B, most likely was to be able to provide the information at a later time so that they weren't overwhelming their younger audience with too much information at once, is what I would speculate. But it does kind of question, like, maybe they wouldn't have been away over in his room if they had already known that she was in danger. They might have been staking out the place instead. But then we would have missed Ichigo giving Rukia a piggyback, and that would have been a loss on everybody's part. So back with Inoue, she's looking at her bear that has a cut on it now, like that has a tear on it, and she happens to notice something on her hands behind where she's holding the bear. She stares at it, internally questioning what the substance is. Before then, we are shown her kind of being flung forward in an attack and seeming to be stabbed by something invisible. Tatsuki then goes to look and check on her because she's just like collapsed here. But then she gets thrown aside by that same invisible something, ending up with a bleeding shoulder. She's against the wall, her shoulder's bleeding, and she is then looking around, not seeing anything, and then she gets thrown around a couple more times before we as the audience are shown the outline of the hollow, so we now know that it is the hollow that is attacking her. However, she is not able to see the hollow. The hollow then tries to strangle her, and we as an audience again see it come into full view, but her not having the spiritual strength, she would not be able to see it. And she, of course, thinks that she is being attacked by something invisible, doesn't know what it is. Obviously, that would be a terrifying experience. Meanwhile, Inoue wakes up in ghost form. However, the chain in her chest, which I don't think I mentioned it, and I should have, a bit of an oversight, apologize for that. Ghosts in this world, the holes, have a chain on their chest. If they're a ghost, typically it's like a broken chain, so it's like hanging down to like their stomach area, from like their chest to their stomach. In this case, though, anyways, is still connected to her body, which of course implies that she's not fully dead, but she definitely is now in ghost form, and you can tell that because of the chain that's coming from her chest and connecting to her body. So anyways, back to the summary, the ghost chain is still connected to her body, and she then now can see the hollow because she is in that spiritual realm, and she runs up and body slams the arm of the hollow so that Tatsuki is now able to get air, and she asks if she's okay, but she of course is ignored by Tatsuki, who cannot see her, and then Tatsuki does pass out. Sora then tells Inoue that Tatsuki can neither see nor hear them, and Inoue asks how it knows her name, and then he, obviously hurt by this, asks if she can't recognize his voice, but she flinches away scared because he looks like a monster. And then he starts melting down about being so sad. He repeats how sad he is, and he like bangs into like various objects because, he's just so sad his sister doesn't remember him. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think it's meant to be funny. Obviously, he's having a meltdown. He's so sad his sister doesn't recognize him. He loved her so much as when he was alive. He's like banging his head to show how depressed he is. But that's what makes it funny. It's the over exaggeration. Obviously, that's not a typical reaction. Like, well, I mean, everybody reacts differently. So potentially it could be somebody's real reaction. I don't want to discount that. But for the most part, majority of people, probably when you are upset or sad, you may cry. You may even like yell out because crying, some people cry really loudly, like a whale. But I don't think you're going around banging your head into walls and such. So the overreaction makes it a bit comedic, in my opinion. And so once the meltdown is finished, Inoue is then attacked by the so sad Hollow, but is saved at the last moment by Ichigo, who has arrived and managed to block the attack, as I said. The Hollow then retreats back into his portal, and Ichigo glances at Tatsuki, thinking about how she got caught up in it too, before Inoue then recognizes him and asks what he's doing there. He's of course surprised that she can see him before he then also notices the chain and flashes back to Rukia explaining that as a Shinigami, only spiritual beings would be able to see him. Then Sora reappears and confirms that Inoue is a spirit and therefore dead. He then grabs her chain, pulling her closer to him, and Ichigo attacks his tail. Again, oversight. I forgot to mention this particular hollow has a snake tail. But anyways, Ichigo attacks his tail. But the sword slides off with no damage, and he is then thrown out the window, where Rukia is waiting outside. Ichigo stands back up, but is told not to move by Sora, who now has Inoue in his grip. And he is again attacked by Sora's tail. Rukia runs over, yelling his name, but at this point, Ichigo is unmoving on the ground. Now, obviously, in this case, the Hollow cheated by sneak attack. And honestly, I think that portal is definitely a cheat because that just gives an unfair advantage. Now, I do question the whole sword not cutting the tail. One, it's a Shinigami sword, so it should be able to cut anything that the Hollow has. But also, two, I mean, I'm sure snake scales offer some protection from like environmental elements and such. However, snakes do have predators and are hunted, and their scales are pierced pretty frequently. Obviously, their scales are quite thin. Like they're not armored scales. Like I've held a snake. It's not like an armored scale. I wouldn't say it's not like a crocodile or something. Also, I have also seen snakes beheaded by a shovel wielded by frail old grandmas. I feel like the sword would have left a wound. I don't feel like it's not like it's a basilisk or some sort of supernatural serpent. It's not a dragon. It is literally like just a snake's tail, like a regular snake's tail. So I feel like those scales, while it does have scales which may offer some protection, I don't know that they would be enough protection to not have any sort of impact from the sword. But upon thinking on it further now, I do know that in anime they do tend to give snakes a lot of protections against weapons, and they never seem to go for the soft spots. They always go for the like toughest scales to add to the action. So that's probably what's happening here. But one, I think the Hollow cheated with the portal usage, and two, I do think that there should have been some damage to the tail, even if it was maybe it didn't get chopped off because there was some protection from the scales, but maybe at least like a wound would have been reasonable, in my opinion. Inoue, who is in Sora's hands, then yells after Ichigo as well, seeing him on the ground, and Sora asks again if she's forgotten him. Inoue pauses, looks into his eyes through the mask, and has the realization that it's Sora. Outside, Ichigo finally gets up with some blood on his face from a head wound, but says that he's fine when Rukia asks and tries to check on him. Rukia then reminds him that Sora is now a hollow, a monster, and no longer has a human heart. Inside, Inoue asks if he's really her brother, as the brother that she knew would never have done what this hollow is doing. He then tells her about how lonely he was, watching as she went from praying for him every day to as she became friends with Tatsuki, now we know why she was attacked, and entered high school, she began praying for him less and less, and that made him feel even worse, lonely and sad. She tries to tell him that he's wrong, but before she's able to fully get out her point, he grabs her shoulders, telling her that if she ever had a shred of feeling for him, to not betray him anymore, and to listen to what he says. He looks to the side, saying it won't take long to kill the Shinigami out there. She, of course, defends Ichigo, saying that he has nothing to do with it, but he tells her to do as he says, as it's her fault he's like this, or he's going to kill her first. Ichigo comes back and stabs his tail, and he stabs it a few times. So he drops Inoue, and then Ichigo manages to cut off his hand as he tries to reach for her again. Ichigo reaches her side, making sure that she's still moving, before turning to Sora to tell him the reason older brothers are born first is to protect their younger siblings. Rukia then comes in, as Sora replies that Inoue is his and he raised her when their parents abandoned them, before telling Inoue if she listens, he won't hurt the others. Rukia warns Inoue not to listen, telling her that it's a trap, and Inoue does hesitate. Obviously, this part is a bit on the sadder side. We get some more backstory, like some more development of the backstory, where we now learn that as an older brother, their parents abandoned both of them, and because of the age gap, he was able to take care of her and he raised her as a parent. And that, it shows that he was an amazing person. Not every sibling would do that. Not every person would do that. Take on a child that isn't theirs and raise them like a parent when they are so young. At the time, I think it was mentioned potentially, I forgot to write it in my notes, but I think it was like she was 3 at the time. So he would be the only parent she knew. They obviously did a lot together, and it just shows how far now he's fallen into corruption against his will as he was forcibly changed, that now he's threatening to potentially kill her, that he's already, she's now in spirit form connected to her body, which is not fully dead, but actively dying if she's in her ghost form. And that just pulls at your heartstrings. That makes you feel bad because you see how good he was to now what's become of him. Now, after a brief pause after her hesitation, Inoue's hair clip kind of gets a little bit of a flash or shine to it, which brings it to Sora's attention, and Sora flashes back to her smiling and calling for him throughout the years. And within the mask, the red light that's kind of overshadowing his eyes starts to dim. And leads to him again having a bit of a meltdown and reeling and smashing his own head into the wall while she yells out for him. He says again that Inoue is his and then attacks, but Ichigo blocks it and throws him out of the hole that was in the wall, following up with an attack that he then kind of hesitates to make. Rukia yells at him not to hesitate, but while he is in the midst of hesitating, Sora spits acid on his hands, causing him to drop his sword. Sora then knocks him to the ground with his tail before circling back to attack him again, but this time Inoue blocks the attack, and she ends up bit in the shoulder as a response. Now I just remembered I forgot a call out on the last scene there where his sword made no effort on the tail and then all of a sudden he's back and stabbing it multiple times. I just want to call that out. But also now we've added another cheat to this hollow where he can spit acid. But the acid doesn't really do much damage. I mean, he did drop the sword, but like his hands are intact. They haven't actually been permanently harmed in any way, shape, or form. So it's a very weak acid, but it is an acid. And that again is another bit of a like I feel like that's cheating. Compared to the other hollows, I feel like he's overpowered and he's just brand new. But to the real Oh, and then also I wanted to call out the fact that there are a lot of shoulder wounds. We've got Rukia in episode 1 when she was bit by the hollow and she had a shoulder wound. We have Tatsuki, who when she was against the wall had a shoulder wound. And now Inoue also has a shoulder wound. I don't know if this is like the author's fetish or it just has good visibility when you're drawing to be able to like show a shoulder versus like some other location being injured, but that's a lot of shoulder injuries that have happened here. And of course, this is one of Inoue's good moments where she kind of, well, on the one hand, it's kind of dumb. Like she again has like similar to Ichigo in episode 1, doesn't have, any sort of weapon or protection. And then she's, hugging her brother, but then she hugs him while his mouth is open, so now she has a shoulder wound. Like, but it is a good moment where like she's protecting Ichigo. She's willing to put her soul literally on the line to do so, and that deserves kudos. So we now show Inoue hugging Hollow Sora, apologizing and saying that it's all her fault for begging him not to leave her, saying that that's why he couldn't rest in peace. She then informs him that she had always sensed him beside her, revealing that he actually hadn't attacked her but had pulled her leg to save her from the car that almost hit her um, in the previous episode. And the reason that she looked like she was moving on was her effort to show him that she was happy and that he didn't have to worry about her anymore. But now she realizes that that just made him lonely and sad before she then falls down, succumbing to her wound, like passing out or weakening, not succumbing as in death, like true death. So she just falls down in weakness. The hollow mask then starts to flash on and off, and Ichigo, of course, turns to Rukia asking her, the expert, what's happening. Rukia tells him that Sora is actually fighting the hollow inside of him, which shows that he didn't become a hollow by choice, but was taken over by one. Ichigo asks why, and Rukia explains that a more powerful hollow can control a soul that it's taken over. As his target was Ichigo, it chose a soul that he would hesitate to fight in order to attack him. And that's when the hollow mask breaks. Now, obviously, this is a very nice but sad moment. It is an emotional moment where she's explaining her side of things. And I think that that's also very sweet, kind of like how we see how he took care of her so much when she was younger. Now she was trying to take care of him in the afterlife, letting him know he could move on, but it was misinterpreted. There was like that miscommunication there because they couldn't actually fully communicate. And obviously, then this changes his perspective on everything, allowing him to be able to then find his will again and fight the hollow that's taking him over. So it's very emotional, but also equal parts sadness and hope that he'll be able to fight and come back from being the hollow. Rukia then turns her attention to Inoue and notes that the chain of fate, which is I guess, the name of the chain that the ghosts have attached to their chest, is still attached to Inoue's body, meaning that she is able to be saved. So Rukia begins to treat her wounds with her, I believe it's keto still. And Ichigo mentions the hair clips that Sora gifted to Inoue that he keeps looking at, saying that Inoue wears them every day because they were from him. Sora picks up Ichigo's sword, deciding that he wants to disappear before he becomes a monster again, having regained his consciousness. Ichigo tries to make him stop, but Rukia reveals that killing a hollow doesn't really kill it, but it cleanses the soul, allowing it to enter soul society, and that is why the Shinigami exist. Before Sora uses the sword, Inoue tells him to wait and reminds him of their fight over the hairpin's childishness and how she didn't speak to him when he had left home, but that was the day he died. So now she wants to tell him that he should have a good day. And then he tells her that he's going to be going now before he stabs himself and bursts into particles of blue light around the sword that then drops to the ground, and then the lights gather together into a large blue orb, which then fades away. Inoue obviously cries on Rukia's shoulder, and that ends that scene. Obviously, there's an emotional impact here. It's a very touching scene. Their final goodbye, their backstory on the hairpins, which is also a sort of foreshadowing if you've watched the series before, and as rewatchers, we do know that future, and adds a little bit more meaning to what the hairpins represent. And of course, Rukia again deals out all of the exposition so that we, the audience, know that it's a happy ending, or as happy of an ending as could be expected given the circumstances, that Sora isn't actually going to be dying or like disappearing from reality or being destroyed. He's actually going to be cleansed and be able to move on to Soul Society like all of the other souls that a Shinigami would rescue. So we know that he is getting to move on in peace. And that, of course, makes what would otherwise be a very sad, sad, sad scene a little bit more hopeful, though still sad, obviously. We then move on to a lighter scene, which is presumably the next day on top of the school roof. Inoue is surrounded by her friends and tells them how the hole in her house happened. A sumo wrestler came in and blasted the hole with a firearm. No one believes her, and off to the side, Ichigo looks to Rukia, who flashes back to puffing smoke from a device in Inoue's face, saying that it's a memory replacement device, but unfortunately she can't choose the new memories, so they'll have to find out what she thinks happened the next day. Ichigo then confirms that this is what she used on his family the other day as well, while staring off into the distance. Rukia then asks him what's wrong, and he says that he's not prepared to do this yet, and he can't promise to risk his life for strangers because he's not that good of a guy. But he also isn't total trash, and that's his words, who'd let somebody be hurt before his eyes. He then holds out his hand to Rukia, saying that he'll help her do the work of a Shinigami, and she smiles and thanks him, telling him that she's counting on him. Obviously, the last couple scenes of the episode were very sad, very touching, very emotional, and this is a great way to kind of bring you back to a happy state for the end of the episode and summarize it and lighten the mood. It also answers questions that we had about why, everybody forgot about the fight at Ichigo's house. Obviously, even if you had supernatural powers, it's a supernatural device, so makes sense that it would work, and she probably just didn't use it on him, which is why he kept his memories, is what I would speculate, though that part, why he's the one who remembered, isn't exactly fully confirmed, it's implied. And so with that, we've now come to the part of the episode where we rank the episode against the others. Obviously, we rank on two lists, the personal ranking and the mostly objective ranking. Mostly objective because bias and judgment still apply, and the personal one is pure emotion. So we come to our mostly objective rank values, and I've highlighted those that apply. So obviously we have the multi-main character development for Inoue, where we get even more context to their backstory, and that's even more fleshed out. We get some of Inoue's motivations in some of her behaviors that she has shown. So we have that at 4 points. Then we also have our single arc supporting character development, which is, again, just more of Sora's backstory with Inoue. It applies to both as it's both of their backstories together, which is 1 point. Then we have the emotional impact, which was successful. Inue's apology and confession scene, the farewell between the siblings, these all pulled at the heartstrings, got an emotional response. That's what was intended. That's what happened. And so the successful emotional impact is plus 3 points. And then we again have world building, where we have the hollows, when killed, are actually cleansed and able to pass on to Soul Society, which we hadn't known before. We knew they were being defeated to stop them from consuming other souls, but not that that was actually saving them as well. And now we do. So that is, of course, 4 points, which brings us to 12 points. However, we also have the excess exposition again, where they're showing us and then they're telling us and sometimes even repeating the information, which I felt was obviously -1, just a minor thing, but always worth pointing out. And then we also got some character regression. And I feel like that was Ichigo who regressed. He has killed by this point, he's defeated 2 hollows, the one that attacked his family, the one at a park. He did so extremely easily. And yet somehow against this hollow, he struggles in his room, and then he comes here and he gets thrown about. And I know that's for the plot. I know that's for the plot so that we can get more of the backstory, so he can essentially come back to himself and we can learn about hollows being saved through being destroyed by Shinigami. But also, it's like we already know that he's stronger than this. Like, he doesn't make a cut on the tail, but then he comes back through the hole after he's been, like, kicked out by the tail, and somehow he can now stab it multiple times and, cut the arm and stuff. So it just feels like they had to make Ichigo as a character weaker in order to fully flesh out the plot. But that also made the character regress from the strength that we already knew, and that's not necessarily the best thing, but it's only a minor thing, which is why it's only a -1 point. But because we went up to 12 and now we're down 2 back to 10, we have our third mostly objective 10 out of 10 episode in a row. So as I mentioned last episode, on the mostly objective list, when 2 episodes get the same score, we will just keep them in episode order. So as all have been 10 out of 10 so far, we have The Day I Became a Shinigami in first place, second, The Shinigami's Work, and third is The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish. On my personal ranking, again, we have some variation. So obviously there's the emotional impact from the touching backstory. We gained quite a bit of information and world building. However, I did find that there was some excess exposition. Ichigo's poor performance was, well, it was poor. And we know to expect better from him, so that's a negative. And obviously, I've mentioned many times, I like Rukia. I don't really like Inoue. It was very Inoue heavy, very Rukia light. Not my favorite, but the emotional impact was very touching. And it was an entertaining episode, so I decided to mark it at an 8 out of 10. And so that brings the personal ranking list. I still liked the Shinigami's Work better, so the Shinigami's Work is in first place, the older brother's wish, the younger sister's wish in second, and then in third place is The Day I Became a Shinigami. And so now we come to the part in the video where we're doing the series ranking, which is where we're ranking each arc against each other. We won't know where the arcs rank until we finish the series, and we won't know the final score of the arc until we finished all of the episodes within the arc. But in this arc, there is 20 episodes, which means a maximum total score of 200 points. And so far, on the mostly objective side, we have 30 out of 200, and then on the personal side, we have 20 out of 200. And with that, we've rewatched and ranked Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami arc, episode 3, The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.